Hi there, it's Keith from the Evangelical Free Church Stony Stratford, and we're continuing our series of short talks in the book of Psalms. And today we're looking at Psalm 63, a psalm of David. Have you ever been really thirsty? I know what it's like to be really thirsty, as one time on a walking holiday, over the period of days, I became dehydrated. And it literally affects your whole being. It doesn't just mean you're thirsty or your tongue's dry and your mouth's dry. It's literally your body aches, you drag yourself along. I remember coming back, and I must have drank a lot of water on the way back, but I weighed myself the first morning I was back, and I then weighed myself the next morning, and I put on 3 pounds, and I suspect I'd probably put on more than that, maybe even 5 or 6, because I'd lost that much liquid. And David is feeling that kind of thirst, but in a spiritual sense. He's in a desolate place. Just listen to this. Verse 1. O God, you are my God. Earnestly I seek you. My soul thirsts for you. My body longs for you in a dry and weary land where there is no water. It could be, and it seems likely as we look later on in the psalm, that David was hiding out from enemies, possibly his son Absalom, who was seeking to take his throne, because it refers at the end of the psalm to him being king. And it also refers to those who would take his life. And he's hiding out in an arid place. And as he looks around the dry landscape, it makes him think of how he thirsts to have fellowship and to be able to worship God again. He thinks back. Just listen to these next few verses. I have seen you in the sanctuary, and behold your power and your glory. Because your love is better than my life, my lips will glorify you. I will praise you as long as I live, and in your name I will lift up my hands. My soul will be satisfied as with the richest of foods. With singing lips, my mouth will praise you. He thinks back to the times when he had fellowship with God. He could go up to the tabernacle to worship. There would be others with him. And through that, he would have spiritual refreshment. And as we see from that picture in verse 5, he would be satisfied. It refers, doesn't it? My soul will be satisfied with the richest of food. He would have food for his soul. And he then reflects on this further. It's rather interesting, this. I suppose when you're going through a time like this, you don't sleep so well. And it says in verse 6, on my bed I will remember you. I will think of you through the watches of the night. But what does he dwell on? He actually gets it right. He doesn't just lie awake worrying. He thinks about where his strength is. And his strength obviously is not in him. He's dried out. He's spiritually thirsty. It's in the Lord. There's a lovely image here, isn't it? I will sing in the shadow of your wings. My soul clings to you. Your right hand upholds me. A couple of bits of imagery there that are quite interesting. The shadow of your wings. It's very much the picture, isn't it, of a mother bird covering over its vulnerable young. Well, David has that kind of security with God. The picture of the right hand. What would the king do with the right hand? He'd extend it, showing favour, and say, come and sit at my right hand. That was the place of favour. And David knows that. He's got favour of God. So despite his terrible condition, he thinks and meditates on the Lord and his care for him, and he feels good about it. He gains back some form of fellowship. And in the end, he contrasts his situation with the situation that his enemies find themselves in. It's quite interesting, really, as we look at the end of the psalm. It talks about those who are seeking to destroy him. And basically it says this: that when they picked a fight with David as the Lord's anointed, they picked a fight with God. And it was one that they were not going to win. But he trusts in God. That's the key thing. So by trusting in God, he is secure. Just listen to this last verse, verse 11. But the king will rejoice in God. All who swear by God's name will praise him, while the mouths of liars will be silenced. I think what's notable about this psalm, and again, it's a wonderful sense of realism that we get in the Psalms, is this. It's not that David has a charmed life, or he lives in comfort all the time because God is on his side. No, he has to go through some jolly tough times. But the point is, God is with him, and God will see him through. In Romans chapter 8, we see in that letter that Paul is writing to people in this church who are suffering. They're getting a tough time for following the Lord. They're being a tough time for being Christians. If they were Christians in Rome, well, who was Christ there? Caesar. That actually means Christ, doesn't it, in that language. And the Christians were seen as subversives. And they would have been given a very tough time for following Christ. But what does Paul say about this? Verse 31 of Romans 8. What then shall I say in response to this? This is about all the sufferings and the things they face. If God is for us, who can be against us? He who did not spare his own son, but gave him up for us all, how will he not also, along with him, graciously give us all things? Does that mean peace and prosperity? No, they weren't having that. But it does mean that God is standing by us and will give us enough for us to stand the storm. And that was made possible. Why? Because Jesus has won the biggest battle of all. He's taken the burden of our sin off us so we can be right with God. Thank you for listening.